Hello, I'm Alex, and welcome back to Tabletop TV. In today's video, we're going to go over painting the Dreadhold, the indomitable floating fortress prison ship from the Dreadhold boxed game, the Dropfleet Commander. The united colonies of mankind are engaged in the largest conflict in humanity's history in their attempt to reconquer the Cradle Worlds, but, behind the front lines, organized crime festers in the vacuum left by the conflict. Law enforcement has become necessarily brutal, expedient, and pitiless. For the worst offenders, there is only one destination, known by a name whispered among lawbreakers in the darkest corners of the galaxy: the Dreadhold. Designed under the Colonial Fleet Penal Corps L1 classification, the DH-735, also known as the Dreadhold, operates at light cruiser strength with a top-tier Level 5 security rating. Inside, its multi-decked cell blocks are reinforced with bulkheads, dividing prisoners into levels of containment that range from low risk, high risk, and isolation. Security measures are nothing short of ruthless. Ceramocomp armor plating and concealed point defense turrets protect against external threats, while ECM shielding wards off electronic interference. Within its walls, automated sentry turrets, electrified flooring, and lethal patrol drones are programmed for zero tolerance, that ensure inmates have no room to maneuver. Shock barrier containment cells strip prisoners of any autonomy, with every movement tightly monitored. And manning the ship is an elite team of guards, engineers, and command personnel, working alongside a fully automated security system. With space for 2,000 prisoners, expandable to 8,000 at surge capacity, the Dreadhold prioritizes efficiency over any notion of leniency. High security cells are fitted with deadly purge functions. In extreme cases, these liquidate high-risk inmates via airlock expulsion. Prisoners are held in windowless cells under constant surveillance. In isolation, biometric tracking ensures total control. Resistance is crushed instantly by machine or personnel. Few ever leave the Dreadhold, and those who do emerge physically weakened, mentally shattered, and socially unrecognizable, permanently changed by their time served inside. So fun, right? So the box art of the Dreadhold has it rendered in this kind of grimy brown-grey colour with these industrial yellow accents, which of course looks fantastic and matches the trailer perfectly. I'm going to try and do something a little bit different, based on the comments on the unboxing video. You guys are quite keen to see it. So yeah, I'm going to try and paint the Dreadhold in a fluorescent jumpsuit orange colour. I am going to, however, make sure that I weather it and beat it up a bit so it still has that kind of grimy, grim tone. The paints I used are all on screen now, and they'll be in the description below as well. So yeah, let's get started. So I've primed the model in Capo Red. I've gone with red because, well, a black spray is actually technically a very, very dark blue. If you ever tried to cover with a weak pigment like orange or yellow over black, you'll find it really takes loads and loads of layers to build up. We go with a colour that works a bit better with the orange, like in this case Capo Red. Yeah, we're off to a good start. And then I'm getting the colours I'm going to use, or the main colours I'm going to use, out on the palette. So I've got black, I've got dark slate grey and Admiralty Grey, and then frosted edge. That's going to be the majority of my black and grey areas. I do get out Vega blue-grey here, but I don't actually use it in the end. I've then got Mohawk Orange, Sunrise Orange, and Apricot. I'm just trying to get the colours I'm going to use, or the colours I think I'll need, out on the palette so I can visualise how this is going to work. And then, yeah, I'm going to make a start with the orange. So I'm thinning it down a bit on my palette with a little bit of water, just so it flows off the brush nicely. Yeah, so Mohawk Orange. It's a very, very powerful, very saturated orange colour, but all oranges are actually a little bit weak, so it's going to take a few coats to go on. You'll see here, I'm going to start applying it. Now, another thing about orange, particularly a very powerful colour like this, that I think has got a bit of fluorescent in it, is it blows out the camera a bit. So there are going to be areas where it's going to be a little bit hard to read. So what I've done as well is take a photo of the model and put it into Photoshop, although any image editing program would do. I've put it in grayscale, and I've then just blocked in where I'd like the colours to go, because again, I'm kind of making this up as I go, so you can see where I've decided where I want to have the orange, the black or very dark grey panels, and what areas I want to be metallic. I'm going to use that as a guideline as I go through the process. It's not going to be a hard rule, but it'll give me some idea as to what colour each panel should be. You can see I'm slowly building up the orange, and again, it won't show up that well in the footage, but it does take a couple of coats. I think it took 2 coats all over the model, and in some areas even 3 coats. But just take your time, brush it on in thin coats, let it dry, don't mess with it while it's drying, then go back over with the orange again. And while I am thinking about what areas I would like to be black and silver later, I don't really care if the orange goes over it, so I'd rather get all the orange down and then fill in areas black if need be. You can see here I'm coming back in with a second coat and just brushing it back over the same areas. Now in some areas I'm going to try and use a cross-hatching pattern, so if I did horizontal strokes with the first coat, try and get better coverage, I will then do vertical strikes, or vertical strokes, for the second coat. And there we go, that is that base colour of Mohawk Orange laid down in a nice, smooth, flat colour all over. Now we're going to do some panel lining to add some definition back in. So here I'm working with burnt toast brown, nice, warm, saturated brown. And I'm going to mix in 4 drops of black wash, not black itself, but the actual black wash paint. Just going to put down 4 drops there in a nice paw print shape. I'm just going to mix them together. And this should give us a paint that's almost the consistency of wash, a little bit heavier, but it's got that nice mix of black and brown to it. And I'm then going to start tracing the panel lines. Now, yeah, again, because of that fluorescent orange, you definitely can't see this in the footage, but there are lots and lots of panel lines all over the armor plates of the Dreadhold. And I'm going to go over basically the gaps between all of them and just try and pick them out with a very thin brush, dragging it toward myself wherever possible. You'll get a bit of capillary action, so the paint should flow off the brush into the recesses. But if you do end up making a mess, it's not the end of the world. You can fix it with the base colour, or even leave it, because we are going to highlight and weather all this later, so it's not the tidiest. It's not the end of the world. Yeah, work your way around the model, find all the gaps in the armour plates, and yeah, this will give it a really nice bit of definition. And then we can move on to shading the orange. So to do that, we're going to take our previous mix, I'm going to pull a bit more over here on the palette, and we're then going to mix in a bit of that Mohawk Orange. This is going to, first of all, make it a bit thicker paint, so it's not quite as, well, watery. We've got more paint in it now, and it'll add a bit of that orange tone to it. So yeah, go for about 2 brush strokes of orange, but it's an art, not a science. Mess around with it until you find something that's thin, and has got just a bit of that orangey colour to it, but not too much. You can see I'm testing the consistency on the back of my hand, making sure it's nice and thin and translucent, and I'm then going to brush this over all the areas that are in shadow. I'm thinking of a sort of general top-down lighting on the Dreadhold here, so any areas on the underbelly are going to be in shadow. So each of these plates is just going to get a thin, even coat of this glaze that I've made, basically. It's going to tint it without reducing the orange too much. All of these downward-facing plates, just gently brushed on. If it's too thin, that's fine. Just do it in one coat, let it dry, do another coat. It's better than doing it too heavy. And now I'm going to block in all of the black and all of these steel sections with black. Again, I'm making this up as I go to an extent. I haven't decided exactly what colour each panel is going to be. I do have that reference I made, of course. But I'll find that the steel, or silver, will go over black much better than it will over orange. And it will also naturally shade itself, because I'll probably be able to leave some black in the recesses. So yeah, I'll start adding black to all of these sections now. Might take a couple of coats. Black's a pretty powerful colour, so it shouldn't take more than 2. I'm going to get all these sections down the side. Obviously I'm going to try to avoid going over the orange if possible. If I do, because it's just a base coat, I can put the orange back over it. That's why we're doing it at this stage here. But yeah, just try to be neat. Work your way around the model. When you get to an edge that touches the orange, just slow down a bit. You need to change down brush size, go ahead. So this gap here, this line that I wanted to have black, I think I did switch down from a size 2 down to a size 1 brush here. Just use whatever you're comfortable with. And then of course make sure to get all the underside as well. Any of these areas are going to be black or silver. And there we go, you can see it's more or less matching the design I had in mind. So it's about 50-50 between orange and then other areas that are going to be either black or steel. And now we're going to highlight the black. Now I figured I'd show you how I dry brush. So dry brushing is pretty straightforward. What I've got here is just a bit of MDF that I've been using for a few years, hence why it's got all this texture in. That's actually good. That texture will help us remove the paint from the brush. I've got some paper towel and I've got it damp. Not wet, not soaking wet, but just a little bit damp. I'm just sponging my brush onto it. Reason being is that dry paint will stick to a dry brush, and then it'll not come off the brush easily. You'll waste loads of paint. By having the brush be just a little bit moist, you'll find that the paint will still come off it nicely. It'll make cleaning it easier. You'll get a much nicer finish. I'm going to pick up a little bit of paint, rotating the brush to get good coverage across this, working into the bristles, and brush most of it off on this MDF dry palette I've made. And I keep going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth until I can almost see nothing coming off the brush, and that's about the level I want. Once I get to there, I'm going to switch over to paper towel, and again, you'll see I'm really working the brush and barely anything's coming off, and that's about the amount we want. And now I'm going to start dry brushing the black areas. So I'm being quite gentle here. You can see I'm holding the brush quite far back, and just flicking it over the grey area, over the black areas. If I get a bit in the orange, it's not really going to matter, because this is a very soft, subtle effect, so unless I really do work it into the orange, it's not really going to impact it. It's going to very quickly add some nice highlighting to those big flat panels that otherwise would be really difficult to get a nice gradient on. Again, I'm not fussed at this stage whether these areas are going to be black or steel in the end. I can dry brush them now and then paint the steel over just fine. So I keep saying steel, I actually mean Supernova Chrome, which is one of the brightest silvers that we do. We're going to start with this because we're going to dull it down with a wash later. So yeah, I'm going to get a bit on the palette, water it down a little bit so it flows off the brush nicely, and now I'm going to go over every area that I do actually want to be steel. So again here, as we work our way into smaller and smaller areas, we do want to be neat, we don't want it to go over the black. We can fix it if we do, a bit of black or a bit of grey, but yeah, a bit of neatness will save us some time here. And as I'm working, I am, again, checking that reference image I made myself so I know which areas are going to be metallic. I don't have to follow it religiously, but it just works as a guideline, and it's worth having that planning step first when you're making up a colour scheme as you go. There we go, that's the chrome blocked in. It looks very, very shiny. It's got a kind of a sports car feel currently, which is not quite what we want. We are going to dull that down in a moment. But first, I'm just going to check the model from all sides, make sure I've done all the areas I want, the colour I want. So is everything steel that's meant to be steel, everything black that's meant to be black, so on. So now we're going to dull and dirty down that metal, because I don't imagine the outside of a prison ship is that well maintained and cleaned. So I've taken a black wash here, I've mixed it 1-to-1 with a Sienna Wash. This will give it a nice, warm, orangey brownish colour, with the black just dulling it down a little bit and darkening it. And then going over all the metallic areas, brushing it in fairly heavily, but I don't want it to pool. So if it does start to pool, I'll just wick off the excess and rinse my brush. And again, trying to be fairly neat here, I don't want to go over the black or the orange if I can help it. If it goes over the orange, that's easier to fix. If it goes over the black, that could be more complicated because we might have to re-dry brush it. But it shouldn't really be a problem. And because most of these areas are recessed, I can let the wash just flow into those recesses and it won't then go over other areas. And then, yeah, keep working our way around the model. We shouldn't be leaving anything that gleaming chrome, ideally. We are going to come back and highlight this shortly with chrome, so we can brighten it back up again if we want to. We want to get those recesses nice and dark and grim first. In fact, in some areas I'm even adding a second coat, so here along the sides I thought that was still a bit too bright, so I've let it dry. I'm adding a second coat off that wash to really, really dull it down. Right, I'm now going to highlight the grey again, and I'm going to use dark slate grey again. So you see I'm taking some of it out of that little well I've made to this little mixing spot here, and then adding about the same amount of Admiralty Grey. We're going to brighten up a little bit without going all the way straight to that next grey colour. And I'm not going to thin it as much as I would normally either. And now what we're going to do is stipple. So stippling is essentially just tapping your brush, or I'm kind of stippling with the side of my brush here. I'm deliberately not going to clean, smooth lines. I'm just applying this along the edges, so kind of like an edge highlight, but I'm tapping my brush. That's giving this really worn, scratchy feeling to it. It's making those edges really pop as well, but we're not getting those clean lines you might see on a UCM ship fresh out of dry dock or on a PHR vessel. This vessel has been beaten up, not poorly maintained, but no one's cleaning the outside of this ship is, again, the feeling I'm trying to go for here. So along these edges here, again, just tapping the brush, holding it quite loosely. This is not a very precise technique. I'm not planning exactly where each tap goes, I'm just going along the lines, adding a little bit of this slightly brighter grey. You can see it's instantly building up that scratchy feeling. I'm also only doing the areas that are facing upwards, so I'm not going to do this edge highlight on the underside of any shape, because I'm, again, trying to get that feeling of light coming from above and catching on those edges. Is that realistic for a ship in space? Probably not, but it doesn't really matter. And again, along the top of these big, imposing grey panels, I'm doing the same thing. And here I'm actually deliberately creating some larger scratches. You can see I'm occasionally letting the brush go onto the very top. I'm rotating my brush slightly as I do so. You can see, there we go, that's the thing I'm talking about. These scratchy lines suggesting micrometeor impacts, or maybe even flying through a debris field, scuffles with pirates. It's a bit of sort of storytelling in the painting process. Once that's dried, which won't take any time at all actually, I'm going to do the same thing with pure Admiralty Grey. And I'm not covering every single bit of stippling I did previously. I'm now just maybe doing more at the very corners of each panel. But again, it's irregular. I want a bit of those previous colours showing through, so it's a very random, very organic process. It's quite good fun. You can't really do it wrong. Again, just working my way along these edges, tapping the brush tip. You could do this in any colour. If you're painting a resistance ship, you could have a blue armour, and you could stipple with a really bright blue or really desaturated blue-grey. Yeah, it works with anything. The model suddenly looks so much more interesting than it did before. And now we're going to give the orange the same treatment. So I'm going to go up to my next orange, which is Sunrise Orange. Orange is an interesting colour because you can't really mix it in the same way you do other colours. If you lighten orange, it stops being orange. It goes into kind of a pinky red, or it goes into a yellow. So you do actually have to use other paints, whereas often I would just mix. But yeah, here we're just going to go with Sunrise Orange. I'm going to do the same stippling tapping technique I did on the grey. And unfortunately, it's really not going to show up much on the camera. You'll be able to see the result in the end photos that we'll show at the end. But yeah, the fluorescence of orange does confuse some cameras, unfortunately. So you kind of have to take my word for it that something is happening here. I'm going over these, basically where one panel joins another, or when it curves. The Dreadhold doesn't really have many smooth lines. It does have quite hard transitions, even along the top. And I'm then just, again, tapping along those edges. Sometimes I'll paint a horizontal line, sometimes I'll tap as well. But mixing it up, the more you mix it, the more organic and random it'll look, which is what we want. Because again, we're going for essentially weathering here. We're trying to create an impression this ship has been beaten up, run down. Here we go. And I think if I tilt this model into the light, you can just about see that that has had an effect. But the next colour we go on to will have a much more pronounced impact. And now we're going to come in with our top highlight of the orange. This is Apricot, and this is a really, really bright, slightly desaturated orange. We're going to use that to do the same technique as we just did, kind of like we did with Dark Slate Grey and Admiralty Grey. We're going to add more scratches, more horizontal lines, but not all over the previous layer. You can see here I'm being a little bit more careful, thinking a little bit more about where these lines go. But once I've placed them down, I can then just start stippling and tapping. And yeah, this just instantly adds so much age and character to the vehicle. And I say it works better for some fleets than others. Obviously, Resistance would lean very much into this. The PCS, again, it kind of fits as beaten up cops. But I would be interested to see someone do this as something like a PHR vessel or a Shaltari vessel, because yeah, they do take damage. They do fly through micrometeor clouds as well. I don't really think I've seen weathered PHR before. If you've ever done it, yeah, let me know in the comments. I'd be interested to see it. Yeah, again, you can see, yeah, that's really worked, and now the orange looks so much more interesting than it did before. We've lost the sports car look, and now it looks like an aged warship. But we are going to weather it some more. So I've got out my dry brush palette again. I've got some more burnt toast brown, which I've put on the edge of that bit of wood. What I've grabbed here is a bit of sponge from a blister pack. If you ever buy resin spaceships or drop-zone models, you'll often get a bit of this foam in. It'll tear off a little bit. I'm trying to get you see where this is going, a random organic shape. And here, I've got a pair of needle nose tweezers. These are unnecessary, you could just use your hand, but I find this lets me be a little bit more precise. And I'm going to grab the back of it, work it into those tweezers, pulling off the excess bits. So what I'm trying to create is essentially a sponge brush that's quite small. I'm going to then dip it in the brown, gently. We're not trying to drown it, just on the very tip of that sponge. And I'm going to work a lot of it off on that paper towel, while we're also working it back into the sponge, so I've got less paint but more coverage. And I'm going to test it on my MDF palette. And what I'm looking for aren't brown spots, but little sort of irregular, tiny little bits of brown, bits to be very difficult to do with a brush. That's about right. And now I'm going to just gently sponge along some areas of the orange. Not the whole thing, I don't want it to read as brown, but any areas that I think might suffer more damage, so the edges of plates, around the front of the ship more than the back of it, a little bit on the wings here, and just gently tapping. And this it'll break up that orange a lot. So again, we're going to have it look less like a sports car and more like a spaceship. And it adds more of that sort of random organic weathering feeling to it. Less is more here. You don't want to overdo this, so if you haven't done this sort of weathering before, apply a little bit and then stop. Hold the model 3 feet away from your face, the distance it would be if you're playing a game, and just check, does that look about right? And if it's looking like it's almost about right, it's probably about the right point to stop. Whereas if you go too far and you end up with it being more weathering than armor plate, it can start to look quite muddy and indistinct. So yeah, take your time and just check occasionally that it's about what you want it to be. Where they go to make sure I don't run out of room. And there we go, that's added a lot of character, and we're almost there now. We've got a couple more details to do, and then she'll be ready. One thing I always like to do is add a bit of freehand. A lot of these big black panels are crying out for it. So I've got Frosted Edge, it's my usual go-to off-white colour. I find pure white looks too stark. I'm just going to freehand some numbers along these panels here. You'll see I did the exact same technique on the PCS painting video I did previously. So I've decided I want 3 numbers here. I'm going to start by doing the top of each number. That'll help me block out essentially where they go to make sure I don't run out of room. So by doing 3 parallel lines, that'll help me, let me figure out the bounding boxes for the numbers, if you like. Now that's done, I'm going to work my way down gently and slowly. I didn't show you the palette, but I have thinned this a bit, but not as much as I would other paints, because I do want opacity and I want to be able to control the paint. So I want it flowing off the brush. I don't necessarily want it really, really thin. And then just do 1 number at a time. Once the first number's done, you've now got your lower bounding box. You know where the bottom of each number ends. If they all end in a horizontal line, if it was, say, 888, you could paint in the bottom line of each of them now. But you may not need to. This way of writing numbers is quite easy because there are no curved lines to worry about. It's all straight edges. As always, take your time. If you mess up, it's easy enough to fix at this stage still. You could just repaint the panel black and then dry brush it grey and then scratch it lighter grey, but it's easier to get it right the first time. If you make small mistakes, you can just come back in with the black to tidy it up a little bit, or as you'll see in a moment, you can weather it. Horizontal lines, checking they're spaced out more or less correctly. Then I also want to do some numbers along the top. So here I want it to say PCS, because this is a PCS ship, followed by the ship's number. So the first thing I've done actually is put a dash in between the 2 sections, and that's going to help me again work out what goes where, so I don't run out of space in either direction. Then I'm working my way back, going backwards with the 3 characters on the left. I'm going to copy it on the right, so it'll read PCS 680 when we're done. So adding those 6 horizontal lines, checking they're spaced out more or less correctly. Makes it slightly easier. And I know the bottom of each number and letter is about where the edge of that panel is. So I can now just work my way from left to right, right to left, whatever's easiest for you. Just realised I've been saying PCS all video. I do, of course, mean PSC. Penal Security Corps. Fortunately, I do write the correct characters on the actual model. Here we go. Rinse the brush, come back in, just start building out the numbers. And there we go. Takes a bit of time, takes a bit of finesse, but this sort of freehand is actually quite easy to do and adds so much to these ships. There we go, look at that. Right, we've got one more step to do on these armor plates. Because we did apply all that weathering to the orange, we do want to weather the black panels as well. So I'm going to do the exact same technique with a bit of sponge and a dry palette, but with black paint this time. And again, work most of it off so we get nice random patterns, not splodges ideally. And then just gently go directly over the freehand, just breaking up those numbers a little bit. And again, adding a few scratches, a few bits where the white's chipped off, just adds that character and adds that age. And if you did make a mistake on the freehand, this is where you could hide it essentially by painting on with a brush black over the areas that don't look very good. So if you have a number that's a bit too tall, you could add a bit of black just to shrink it slightly. Now I am going to come back in and, as I said, highlight up some of those metallic areas because they're looking a little bit dull. So I've got here pure Supernova Chrome and a fairly sharp brush. I'm just going to catch the edges of a few metallic areas. I'm not even drawing lines here, I'm adding little spots of colour just to make them pop a little bit more. So that hatch there I want to be quite noticeable. These pipes, or whatever they are, catching the very edges of them with that chrome, and you can see they pop immediately, which is what we want. Anywhere where you think it looks a little bit muddy and indistinct, just add a little bit of that chrome. And then lastly, we're going to do the engines. So I've got here Sea Serpent Teal, really nice, powerful, saturated teal colour. Get a little bit on the palette, and I'm going to mix it with Frosted Edge to brighten up a little bit. The engines on the Dreadhold are quite small, but there are loads of them, so there's not much room to work with individually. So all I'm going to do is just put a little bit of that first mix into each of those drive cones, and make sure not to miss the ones that are on the underbelly, and a little manoeuvring thrusters it has as well. Now when that's done, I'm going to get that almost pure Frosted Edge, and just put a dot of that on the middle of each of the drive cones. If you wanted it more pronounced, you could dry brush the teal colour around this, but I think it works quite well here. And there you have it, a bright, punchy prison jumpsuit orange Dreadhold, but with some grime and some weathering that, yeah, I think helps keep it grounded. I'd say the orange and the black, they work well together. It's a good striking contrast. The freehand helps tie it into the wider PSC fleet. Yeah, I would say this worked. But yeah, what do you guys think? Are you going to try it in some other colours? It'd be interesting to see the Dreadhold in, I can imagine a really beaten up weathered white could work nicely, or in blue and yellow to match the PSC fleet. Yeah, let me know in the comments what you're planning to do with yours. While you're down there, tell me if you found this sort of tutorial style helpful. Did it help me going over my sort of thought process for how I put together the colour scheme, techniques I used, and so on? Or just, yeah, let me know you enjoyed the video. Either way, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss other videos coming up. We're still going to do a painting tutorial for the 8-fold Syndicate, the Resistance fleet that comes in the Dreadhold box, and we're going to have eventually battle reports and so on coming out as well. So subscribe so you don't miss any of that, like the videos so it reaches more people, and thank you for watching. We'll see you again soon. Goodbye.